Hello, everybody. My name is Billy the Skwid, but today is a very special day, for I am about to dine on the finest crow that the internet can provide. And by that, I mean I'm about to talk about Outriders, and unfortunately, the game did better than I wanted it to. Or, well, the game actually didn't do horrible and isn't a bad product. So yes, Dining Upon Crow is what we will be doing today. I will not be making a final hit piece for Outriders. It'll still be critical, but it's not going to be a scathing review like I originally thought it was going to be when I made the last video calling it Anthem or... Fuck, what is that Gearbox game that is just so bad that it's wiped from my memory? Godfall, that's it. Godfall. It's not an Anthem. It's not a Godfall. It is honestly more along the lines of a Remnant from the Ashes with the looter aspect than anything from what I've seen. Now, while I am dining upon Crow, we are also going to be looking at footage from my good friend CROTemplaR. Links will be down below. He is a good streamer and YouTuber, and just an all-around great guy, and he provided me with the Outriders footage that I needed to make this video because I have not purchased Outriders. So first disclaimer there, I have not purchased Outriders. I have not played any of the main game, but I have watched significant amounts of content all the way from beginning of the game up through end game, which we will be witnessing today from multiple different perspectives. Mr. CROTemplaR here is using a Technomancer build for his playthrough, but I have seen the Pyros, I've seen the Tricksters, I've seen it all. I have been very, very invested in watching this game and seeing how it actually did, because I put so much effort into tearing it down that I need to make sure that all that is justified, and it is not justified 100%. So let us get into the meat and potatoes, and let's get into what Outriders has done. So Outriders, when it launched, much to community dismay, but nobody was really surprised, had a horrid launch as far as two things went: technical issues and server issues. This is a game that is not a live service title, but it is charading around as a live service title. This includes the always online feature, and in a single player game, when always online is required, you're going to have issues, especially day one when server loads are going to be higher than you've ever seen them. You can never truly beta test or ground test your servers for a max infusion of players, so there were issues. I think the first day they actually just shut down the US servers so US players couldn't play the game, just so that the rest of the world could, and it actually worked, oddly enough. And as much as people want to give Outriders shit for these server issues, it wasn't necessarily the game's fault as much as it was the devs just underestimating the payload that was going to be coming their way. And I feel like this happens every single time. I don't think any game that has server issues, or any game that functions on a live service model, hell, even World of Warcraft, whenever it comes out with new expansions, its servers do not hold up to anything. So I can't really knock the Outriders servers being down for a good portion of the first week that it was out as a super big flaw, but I will say that due to critical reception of the demo and then these server issues happening, it really puts a hit on new players into the game. I don't know if that has pulled back from the initials, but I do know of several people who were they didn't enjoy the demo as much as they had wanted. And let's be real here, the demo is probably the most damning thing about Outriders, because whenever you put out a demo that's supposed to show exactly what your game is going to be in its full capacity, this is one of the worst that has ever been put out. It was boring. It didn't give a good flow of the story. It left critical gameplay components out, like being able to, most of the crafting system was just forgotten. Yes, you can farm legendaries and stuff like that, but a good chunk of the game is building around mods and crafting your weapons, and that was just not even factored in, which made the game feel like it was going to be a lot more shallow than what it already was, especially if you're not paying attention to the dev blogs. the devs have been very, very good about being vocal with the community and putting out as much info as they can about what's going on with the game. Even during the server outages, they were very, very upfront about everything. So good on them. But the demo did not give an accurate showcase of what Outriders was going to be. And I fell into that trap as well, especially with the console version performing as poorly as it did. And whenever the game fully released, it actually flip-flopped. The PC version was the one that was plagued with issues. The console versions, while neither PC or console version of this game looks amazing, it looks very much old school in its graphical styles. The particles look amazing, but everything else about the game just looks like last gen. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's still like, it's passable. It's just nothing exceptional. And whenever you come from the likes of being compared to Destiny and whatnot, graphics, I don't feel like you're going to be able to compete with that, especially on the scale that they were working on. But yes, the PC version was riddled with some pretty decent bugs, and this is something I can blame the devs for. The game, I'm assuming, was primarily made for PC, so I was really expecting it to be the Golden Goose port, and for the consoles to be Cyberpunk 76, or whatever the fucking game title is that's ported nowadays. I fully expected that to be the case, and when I came to realize that the PC version was the botched one, I was like, the fuck? There was multiple crash issues. There were some issues with quests not being able to go through and whatnot, and causing full restarts. Anything that causes a full stop in play is going to be a bad time and is going to lose you players. Most of these have been resolved from what I understand. The game is still not super duper stable. As far as the crashing goes, I do know people still to this day getting probably 1 to 2 crashes a play cycle, but it's a lot better than what it was. On top of these crash issues, there was a massive stuttering issue with this game on PC ports. It was just a very consistent, like every 5 seconds, the game would just lock up and then it would go. And then it would lock up and go. And this would happen in combat. This would happen in cities. It was a massive issue. And it was a lot of different possibilities on what was going on with it. I know a lot of people were saying that the game wasn't playing well with GeForce Experience, so if you uninstall GeForce Experience, it would do better. I know some people were saying that you have to play it in 1080p. The game doesn't like it if you upscale it any more than that. There's a lot of stuff going around, and some of these fixes worked for some people, and some of these fixes didn't work for anybody. But again, the devs have worked on it. The game is in a much more stable place than it was, from what I understand. And this is both a pro and a con, I guess I should say, with Outriders. They shouldn't have launched the game in this kind of a condition for the PC, but they also were a lot faster about fixing these issues than what most of the gaming industry is these days. These kinds of issues in a lot of different AAA titles probably would have lasted a month to 2 months, or in like I said with Cyberpunk, they're just now getting the game to a stable play rate on PC, and there's still a cornucopia of issues that they're working out. So not the worst, and definitely not Anthem level of bugs and stuff, but they were there. They were very, very noticeable, and some of them game breaking, but the devs have worked, and they are, for the most part, fixed. And once the game is actually running and functioning properly, the most important thing is the product fun? Is it a good time to play? And from everybody that I have watched play the game, they are a mixed bag leaning towards optimistic. The worst experiences I have seen is people that just get burnt out on the map setup in general, where you go into a room, it's a kill room, you kill things, that kind of stuff. But I feel like if you're getting burnt out on that kind of thing, this isn't going to be the game for you in general, just because this is how these kinds of games function. It is very much a third-person shooter Diablo in that regard, taking like the Remnant from the Ashes style gunplay mechanics, only amp it up with superpowers, and then throw it into a Diablo style kill room setup where you walk a hall, go into a kill room, kill that shit, move on. It reeks of Diablo in every way, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I can understand where people can get bored with that. The enemy variation with the monsters did increase enemy variation. I think the humanoid enemies are still very, very bland. And honestly, I think a lot of the monster variety is very, very bland. But you throw it all together and it gives you a halfway decent amount of variety in what you're going to be fighting in all stages of the game. You're going to be fighting a lot of the same thing. But again, if you compare this to something like Destiny or Remnant from the Ashes or anything along those lines, enemy variety has never been the strongest suit of those games. It's been more of like combinations of those enemy types so that you're able to get familiar with an enemy type, and then whenever they throw it into a group with another enemy type that you might not be as familiar with, that first enemy becomes a lot more threatening because you're having to micromanage the one enemy you're not familiar with the one that you know is threatening, but you've fought it several times earlier. So it's a mix of familiarity in individuals, but the gestalt effect of the sum of its parts becoming the true threats. But yes, the game is very, very fun. One thing I will say from what I've seen is the power trip effect in a lot of these classes is very much there. It does give that excellent power fantasy if you spec the correct way. And this is another criticism I'm going to have of the game, and a reason that this is going to feed into something that I can be critical of the devs of. So the balancing of the classes is not very good at all right now. There's always going to be a meta on how things go with these games and how builds evolve. There's always going to be a max DPS build and stuff like that for each of these classes. But in this game, it is very, very much blatantly overtuned in several directions. And even one of the classes, the Trickster, is just overtuned in general, whereas the Devastator class has fallen to the wayside. A lot of people thought it was going to be the golden goose of the game. It is actually one of the worst classes in the game, and it's just a balancing issue. And a lot of you might be saying, well, it's a PvE game, balancing doesn't really mean a lot. And to a point, you are right, but to a point, you are also wrong. And there is a co-op aspect to this game where everybody's kind of like not directly competing, but it is a race to get to the best loot. And when all of your builds end up funneling into one or two branching points, that is where issues occur. Now, I am of the mindset it's a PvE game. I don't give too many shits about balance as long as what I want to play is a viable way to play. And as of right now, for endgame content, that is not entirely the case with some of these builds. There is very much a way that if you spec into something that you might be finding a lot of fun, it's just not going to work out and you are going to have a bad time and get frustrated because just for the simple fact that the build that you chose is not viable. And that is unfortunate. I hope the devs do fix this, but I am critical of their ability to fix this because their first big balancing patch that they brought out was a list top to bottom of nerfs. Nerfs to classes, nerfs to enemies. Everything got brought down. And in a game like this, where power fantasy is the prime objective, I don't feel like throwing nerfs exclusively is a way to do that. You need to bring up the bad to meet whatever good you are like pegging down. You know what I'm saying? As Carnage said in Twitter whenever he was talking about this game and talking about that patch specifically, nerfs are fine as long as you are bringing up the suck. And they did not bring up any of the suck. The classes that were bad are still bad. They just brought it down so that the overpowered builds are less oppressive. And maybe people will think of going to the other ones, but they're still the primary way of doing things. It's just going to slow down progress. And I feel like if they keep going that route, they're going to lose people a lot in that regard as well. Borderlands 3 had a big issue with nerfing its meta builds for its classes and not really bringing up any of the other classes to meet those requirements. They've since kind of fixed that, and there's a lot of different viable playstyles for all of these. But with this game, I'm critical because it just seemed like people were getting through the game too fast with these overpowered builds, so they put like a cork in the flow of legendaries for people where they just slowed them down so that they weren't able to progress as quickly and weren't able to do as well. Now, as you're seeing here, Mr. Crow He is not using one of the meta builds. He is using one of the fortunately viable Technomancer builds that doesn't rely on bullets mechanics. The overpowered builds right now are all the bullets, like, buffing builds. But yeah, it is a point of concern and a point to look for. I hope they will eventually start buffing up these classes and just letting us do power fantasy. Hell, even if you buff everything up so that the player base as a whole is steamrolling through the game, you can then buff up the enemies to kind of even that out. I would rather them do that than just keep bringing everything down and just slowing the game overall. And it kind of is counterintuitive to what they are wanting to do with the game, because the end game is really, really good. But by doing this kind of stuff, they're kind of stagnating that. And what I mean by that is the end game mechanics are all about speed running through these adventure things that you go out. They're called expeditions, I believe. And the faster you clean out these expeditions, the better and more loot that you get. So the game is very much built around min-maxing, which is, again, why I feel the nerfs are unnecessary, because it is just going to slow down the already viable, like, oppressive builds. They're still going to be oppressive, they're just going to be slightly slower. And while it might bring a few more of the, like, less optimal builds in mind, it's still going to leave the bottom of the barrel builds just not able to proceed. You're not going to be able to push through in-game quickly because you're not going to be able to get enough loot to power up properly, which is going to make you have to go through this stuff several more times than somebody who is running a meta build, and so on and so forth. And while the end game getting through all of the content isn't necessarily based around speedrunning it, you don't have to meet a certain speed, I don't believe, to actually progress through these endgame expeditions to get to the Eye of the Storm. To be able to power up to push through these and actually be able to finish them is going to be a lot more of a struggle. But I really like what they did with the endgame. I think it is a really nice way of both keeping things fresh while also familiar. It's still the same enemies for the most part. There's a few unique aspects to these expeditions, but for the most part, it's stuff that you're all familiar with. The level designs are different, though. It's not like Godfall, where the end game was literally just you going through story missions or going up a giant never-ending elevator. It's at least engaging in that regard. I just hope that the balancing team thinks about what they're doing and makes it so that everybody can have fun with whatever playstyle they want. Because at the end of the day, it is a single-player or co-op experience. There's no competitive aspect really to it, so why not just boost everybody to the fucking moon? But that kind of brings it all to fun factor, and from what I'm seeing, a lot of people are enjoying this game. It is doing significantly better than what I originally thought it was going to. I thought it was going to be a buggy train wreck. I thought it was going to be shallow. I thought it was going to be a lot of things, and fortunately, the modding system, the way that you build your builds, everything about this game is very, very engaging and very, very good in what it does. The skill tree is still pretty boring in my capacity with just like number and percent buffs, but that is manageable when the modding system with the weapons and gear is so extensive on what you can do with it and how it powers up your abilities and how the abilities interact. I think they did a great job with it. I think the game is very, very good, and if you don't hold it up to a game as a service model, which you shouldn't because it isn't, if you take it for the sum of its parts on a story that you push through and an end game that you push through, and once you get through that, you're done until the next DLC comes out, it's going to be a good time. You're going to enjoy it. The story is a hit or miss. I didn't want to bring up the story too much because it's one of the most polarizing aspects of the game, and that you're either going to love it or hate it, and my opinion on that is not going to factor for a good majority of the people watching. So I didn't want to throw that out there just because what I enjoy and what you enjoy isn't going to be the same thing. It's not objectively a bad story. It's just the presentation might not have, like, vibe with everybody. But the fun factor is there. The game is good. I completely missed the mark on my assumptions on what this game was going to be. And I am happy to say that because, again, The reason I was so critical about this game in the past was because I wanted it to succeed. I wanted something good for the genre that had been scorned so much with the Avengers, with Anthem, with all of these other looter shooters that just did not hit the mark. This game significantly does better than all of those. It is honestly Borderlands level good in a lot of ways. I don't think the writing and stuff personally for me is of that point, but I think the fun factor, while being very, very different, is there in a different way from the Borderlands experience. The Borderlands is all about wackiness in its gunplay mechanics and stuff like that. This is more based around like power fantasy and ability melding, so it's definitely up there with that tier of game. Once the game is completely fixed and stuff, it's definitely something that I will be checking out. Do I think it deserves a full $60 price point? For me, it's a no. I'm definitely probably going to pick it up, but I'm going to be waiting for a sale on the game. It doesn't vibe enough with my particular play styles and how I want to play through these games as much as, say, a Borderlands would, where I did pay full price for Borderlands 3 because that's a game that I knew I was going to enjoy. This one, I'm still on the fence about it, but it is something that I might revisit here once I actually get the game, if it ever goes on sale here within the next year. So with that being said, what do you guys think about Outriders? How have you been experiencing? What builds have you been doing? And do you think there's anything they can improve on? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you again, CROTemplaR, for allowing me to use your gameplay footage. His links will be down below. Please check him out. He is a wonderful, wonderful person. And until next time, Tentacrew, I will see you later. And as always, much love.